This is another sign of the times, an analysis, and a commentary. Zechariah chapter 12, verse 9. And in that day I will be certain to annihilate all the nations that come against Jerusalem.
So obviously there's a terrible mess in the Middle East, and everybody has an opinion about it, but everyone's also woefully what would you call it? Underinformed with regards to the situation there, because it's unbelievably complicated. And so I think people take sides and make opinions without knowing the first thing about what's actually happening. And so I want to ask you a bunch of really basic questions, and we can flesh out the landscape for everybody who's watching and listening. So the first question I'd like to ask you is, what is Hamas exactly? How would you characterize it?
Before actually we say what is Hamas, we need to ask ourselves, what is Palestine?
Okay.
Because Palestine is non-existential. And it was never a country. It's not ethnic group. It's not a religion. It's not a faith. It's a colonial entity created by the British that lived for about 25 years. And Jews, Arabs, Druze, Christians, Zionists were called Palestinians before the termination of the British mandate. It was called the British Mandate of Palestine. So the mandate itself had the name Palestine. Now,
right, and this is all taking place after World War I,
after the collapse of the Ottoman Empire.
Right. So the empire collapses. There's questions about how the political boundaries should be drawn. The British establish this state known as Palestine, and so what should people think about that exactly? What do you think people should think about the fact that the British were involved? I mean, they won World War I and the Ottoman Empire collapsed, so there was some mopping up to do, and often those things are done in a hurry and with less than optimal information, let's say.
Yes. Well, the Ottoman Empire continued for about 400 years. During that time, they ethnically cleansed the Jewish people from their land, which explains why the Jewish people were all over the place. After World War I and all the atrocities and the persecution of the Jewish people, they felt the need to seek a refuge, and the homeland was the best option for the Jewish people. Now, this led to clashes between the colonizer, which was the British Empire, and the Jewish people. The Jewish people fought for their independence and they shed blood in the process. Also, the Arabs did the same. In 1948, when the United Nations divided the land, giving the opportunity to the Jews and the Arabs to build and establish their own states, the Jews declared their independence, but the Arabs declared war against the Jews. And I think this is a very important point to understand. There was no such a thing as Palestine. And when we talk about the British Mandate of Palestine, it was never a state. It was just a transitional period from the collapse of the Ottoman Empire to the termination of the British Mandate. And that was less than 28 years.
So that termination was in 1948?
In 1947.
Okay. So why, in your estimation, weren't two states established at that time? A state for the Palestinian Arabs and a state for the Jews?
From Muslim point of view, and this is where it gets tricky, this is where nobody wants to talk about the ideological religious dimension of this war. From Islamic point of view, the Al-Aqsa Mosque and the surrounding areas does not define boundary. The surrounding areas could be 100 miles, could be 500 miles. Is an Islamic trust that no Muslim leader has the authority to give it away to the non-Muslims. So when the Jewish people return to their homeland, the Muslims outraged. And that's the most fundamental reason and motive for the Arabs and Muslims to fight against Israel, because they consider that territory as an Islamic land.
Right, and that's the mosque that's built on what was the Temple Mount.
Exactly. It's
right.
Actually, the history of the mosque is about approximately 1,300 years, but the Jewish temple beneath is a lot older than that, and the Jewish ruins in Judea and Samaria still erected, actually. And the Jewish people have overwhelming evidence of artifacts and archaeology that support their existence over centuries, millennia. But the Muslims don't. There is no currency, there is no book, there is no Bible, there is only a building that is 1,300 years old. And this is why, for the Jewish people, don't have a problem in principle to coexist with other ethnic groups. Like even the Zionist movement did not have a problem to have a two-state solution back in the day, while the Muslims refuse completely having Jewish existence on that land. The same way in Mecca, non-Muslims are not allowed to enter Mecca, even to drive through Mecca. The same thing, they want the situation to be in Jerusalem.
How did you come to these conclusions? I mean, I don't imagine this is how you looked at the world when you were young. So how did you come to these conclusions? I understand that your father, Sheikh Hassan Youssef, is a co-founder of Hamas. So obviously that's complicated, to say the least. So tell me how you looked at things when you were a young man, and then what events in your life started to change your mind?
Since I was very young, I had...
How old are you now?
I'm 45 years.
45, okay. So you were born in about 1980?
1978.
78, yeah.
So I had critical thinking from the early beginning of my life. When the mullah told the funeral crowd that the angels of heaven are going to come back and interrogate this deceased in the grave, they're going to bring his soul back, they're going to torture him, and if he does not answer the right question, it's going to be an open hell. I went back to the graveyard and I investigated. I was only 10 years old. And since that point of my life, I did not find death intimidating as much as actually became my drive to seek a higher truth.
Zechariah chapter 12. A pronouncement. The word of Jehovah concerning Israel, declares Jehovah, the one who stretched out the heavens, who laid the foundation of the earth, and who formed the spirit of man within him. Here I am making Jerusalem a cup that causes all the surrounding peoples to stagger, and there will be a siege against Judah as well as against Jerusalem. In that day I will make Jerusalem a heavy stone to all the peoples. All those who lift it are sure to be severely injured, and all the nations of the earth will be gathered against her. In that day, declares Jehovah, I will strike every horse with panic, and its rider with madness. I will keep my eyes on the house of Judah, but I will strike every horse of the peoples with blindness. And the sheikhs of Judah will say in their heart, the inhabitants of Jerusalem are a strength to me by means of Jehovah of armies their God. In that day I will make the sheikhs of Judah like a fiery pot among wood, and like a fiery torch in a row of cut grain. and they will consume all the surrounding peoples on the right and on the left, and Jerusalem will again be inhabited in her place in Jerusalem. And Jehovah will save the tents of Judah first, so that the beauty of the house of David and the beauty of the inhabitants of Jerusalem may not be too great over Judah. In that day Jehovah will be a defense against the inhabitants of Jerusalem. And that day the one who stumbles among them will be like David, and the house of David like God, like Jehovah's angel who goes before them. And in that day I will be certain to annihilate all the nations that come against Jerusalem. And all these are more signs of the times.